Welcome to the deep dive. Today, forget just, looking up at the stars. We're really diving into how earthly power games are now being played out way up there.
Yeah, space isn't just about exploration anymore, is it?
Not at all. It's fast becoming this critical arena for global influence for power. We've got some fascinating material today that really lays bare how high the stakes are getting.
Absolutely. We're going to try and dissect this intricate web-connecting geopolitics,
Mm.
particularly the ripple effects of, well, Trump's economic policies,
Hmm.
those big tariffs he brought in,
Right.
and how that intersects with the escalating space race with China.
Okay.
Our goal really is to pull out the core forces at play and, what they might signal for who leads in space down the line.
And maybe more importantly, what these big shifts mean for you, our listener, someone who's tracking these significant global currents.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Starting with those Liberation Day tariffs, as the source calls them. It wasn't just a minor tweak, was it?
Oh, not even close. The article details how the second Trump administration essentially slapped a minimum 10% duty on all U.S. imports.
Wow, all imports.
Yep. But it got much steeper for certain nations. China faced a staggering 104% tariff.
104%.
Yeah. The EU was at 20%, Japan 24%, Vietnam 46%. So these weren't small adjustments. It was a massive shift.
A seismic shift, really, clearly signaling a move towards prioritizing domestic production, even if it meant potentially a huge cost to global trade.
Precisely. And the thinking behind it, as the article clarifies, was multi-pronged.
Yeah.
Reignite American manufacturing, shrink those trade deficits,
Sure.
and crucially for our chat today, bolster national sovereignty. And that definitely includes technological independence.
Okay, so if we look at the space industry through that lens, the article does paint a picture with some, let's say, potential upsides for U.S. companies.
That's the potential silver lining, yeah. By making imports way more expensive, these tariffs could, in theory, act as a powerful incentive. Get aerospace manufacturers to bring operations back home.
Reshoring.
Exactly. Reshoring, which could be a real boost for domestic suppliers. Satellite components, avionics, launch systems, the whole lot.
Right.
The article also hints that strategic areas, think rocket propulsion, advanced materials, maybe even things like lunar habitats, might see less foreign competition, maybe even get subsidies.
And this feels like a big but. This brings us to how interconnected the industry actually is, right?
Mm-hmm.
As nice as that made in America idea sounds, space operates globally. You can't just flip a switch and build everything you need domestically overnight.
You really can't. And the article really underscores this dependency on these complex international supply chains.
Yeah.
Think about the super specialized electronics and satellites, or the lightweight solar panels they need, or complex cryogenic parts for fuel.
Very specific stuff.
Extremely specific, often coming from niche suppliers scattered across the globe. So huge tariffs. They inevitably mean higher production costs for U.S. firms.
And these aren't just, average circuit boards we're talking about.
Not at all. Often highly specialized materials, unique manufacturing processes. Maybe only a few companies worldwide can even make them.
And those higher costs, they don't just disappear. The article points out they probably ripple outwards, right? Potentially causing delays.
That's the risk. Delays to some really big, important programs. NASA's Artemis program, getting humans back to the moon, is specifically mentioned.
Wow.
And also critical space capabilities for the Department of Defense.
So holdups there could have serious strategic implications.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when you factor in the other major player we need to talk about, China.
Right. Okay, let's pivot to the U.S.-China space rivalry. The article frames it as heating up fast.
Intensely, yeah.
With a particular focus, it says, on the moon's south pole. Why there? What's so suddenly vital about that specific bit of lunar real estate?
It's fascinating, really. There's this growing scientific consensus about potentially significant deposits of water ice locked away there.
Water ice.
And this isn't just about drinking water for future moon bases, though that's part of it. Water, H2O, can be split into hydrogen and oxygen.
Rocket fuel components.
Exactly. The basic components of rocket propellant. So whoever controls the South Pole potentially controls access to this critical resource. It could be the gas station for future deep space missions.
Wow. So it's not just flags and footprints anymore.
Not at all. The real prize could be that water ice. It potentially makes the South Pole the most valuable strategic real estate, well, maybe in the whole solar system right now.
Okay, so the game's changed. It's about resources that could fundamentally reshape space travel. The article highlights the U.S. plan. Artemis, NASA, SpaceX, international partners, aiming for a human landing, maybe 2025, and a sustainable base.
That's the U.S. vision, a big collaborative effort. But China, as we know, has its own significant ambitions.
Their own station, right?
Indeed. They've increasingly acknowledged this competition, which is actually a shift in their public stance. Their International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS, is positioned as a direct competitor to Artemis.
How are they framing it?
The article points out Chinese state media, top science officials. They're framing it in terms of technological superiority, operational efficiency, even drawing parallels sometimes to the old Cold War space race.
Wow, echoes of the past, but maybe with even bigger consequences now, given those resources.
Potentially, yes.
And the U.S. perspective, according to the article, sounds like there's a growing concern. It mentions Jared Isaacman.
A nominee for NASA administrator, yeah.
He apparently warned against shifting focus away from the moon towards Mars too quickly.
Right. He stressed the real danger of China potentially gaining a strategic upper hand on the moon and what that would do to U.S.-based leadership.
So it raises this big question about long-term strategy, doesn't it?
It really does.
Is the priority securing the moon, those resources, developing capabilities there? Or is it still the big, ambitious leap to Mars?
And the article highlights this as a key fault line, a debate happening right now within U.S. space policy circles.
Now, this rush to the moon, setting up long-term operations, it inevitably brings up some really basic questions about, like, property rights, governance in space. The article touches on the legal side, and it sounds pretty murky.
That's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Because neither the U.S. nor China has really spelled out how any potential claims to lunar territory or infrastructure would fit with the existing Outer Space Treaty.
Which basically says no country can own parts of the moon, right?
Broadly speaking, yes.
Yeah.
It prohibits national appropriation. Now, the U.S. has pushed Artemis Accords.
Okay, what are those exactly?
They were essentially a set of non-binding principles trying to establish responsible behavior resource extraction, safety zones, preserving heritage sites, things like that. It's an attempt to build a framework kind of alongside the Outer Space Treaty.
But China hasn't signed on.
Nope. China has notably not signed the Artemis Accords.
So you have this potential situation, as the article suggests, of a kind of race-to-state claims without a clear, agreed-upon rulebook.
Exactly. And that sounds like a recipe for potential disputes down the road, doesn't it?
It really does. Without some kind of mutual agreement on these basic legal points, the competition could easily spill over from just technology into, well, serious legal and geopolitical clashes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got governments, intense competition, but the article also makes it crystal clear. You can't analyze U.S. space strategy today without factoring in one person, one company, Elon Musk and SpaceX.
No, you absolutely can't. SpaceX is, well, they become indispensable. Transformative, really, for the U.S. space ecosystem.
How so? Remind us.
Well, they hold the prime contract for NASA's Artemis lunar lander. That's the Starship vehicle. They're the undisputed world leader in satellite deployment with Starlink.
Right, Starlink.
And they're a key launch provider for the Pentagon's national security missions. It's this hugely integrated private space powerhouse with truly global influence.
And the article points out kind of astutely, I thought, that Musk's influence is a bit of a paradox. Well, on one hand, SpaceX is undeniably pushing U.S. capabilities forward at incredible speed. But on the other hand...
Ah, yes. His public statements, his sometimes unpredictable political stances, they can inject a degree of volatility, maybe uncertainty, into long-term strategic planning.
Right. And the article also brings up that debate, again, fueled by Musk's primary focus being Mars colonization.
That long-term vision.
Which, as we heard with Isaacman's comments, doesn't always line up with the view that maybe sustained lunar development should be the immediate top priority.
It's like that internal tug-of-war playing out again. Where should the immediate emphasis be?
But putting aside those different long-term visions for a second, the article really hammers home the near-term strategic importance of Musk's tech, especially Starship.
Undeniably. The potential for Starship to drastically slash launch costs if it becomes fully operational, that's a genuine game changer.
Wow.
It could revolutionize getting cargo not just to orbit, but maybe between planets. And it would massively boost U.S. logistics, both near Earth and for deep space missions later on.
And we're already seeing the impact of private players like SpaceX in real-world geopolitics, aren't we?
We absolutely are. The article cites Starlink in Ukraine.
Right. Keeping communications open.
Exactly. It just underscores how vital these private satellite constellations have become. For comms, situational awareness.
Hmm.
Even in active conflict zones, it really shows how deeply private space capabilities are now woven into 21st century power projection.
So if we try and tie all these threads together, what picture emerges?
It looks like a convergence, really. A convergence of powerful forces putting the U.S. at a critical crossroads.
You've got the legacy of Trump-era economic nationalism.
Right. Then you've got a very assertive China with clear, ambitious space goals.
Hmm.
And you have the rise of these incredibly powerful private players like SpaceX.
So the article seems to conclude by highlighting this central tension. The tariffs, meant to boost domestic industry,
Yeah.
they also risk disrupting the international cooperation and the complex supply chains that you often need to stay ahead in space.
Precisely. It's a tricky balance. The article really stresses this urgent need for the U.S. to develop and stick to a clear, coordinated strategy.
A strategy that does what?
Well, it needs to carefully balance Moon versus Mars ambitions. It needs to effectively align public efforts, like NASA's, with private sector dynamism.
Okay.
And it needs to actively work to reinforce international norms, those rules of the road in space.
Because ultimately, as the article wraps up, the choice is made right now. They won't just shape space exploration's future.
No, they'll significantly shape the geopolitical map of the mid-21st century and probably beyond.
So the question isn't if space is political anymore.
It absolutely is, unequivocally.
The real question is about the wisdom, the foresight of the political choices being made right now in this new frontier.
And that brings us full circle, doesn't it? We've looked at how economic policies like tariffs, designed for one thing, can have complex, maybe even counterproductive effects in a global sector like space.
Right. And we looked at the intensifying U.S.-China space race, especially around that strategic lunar South Pole.
Mm-hmm. And we highlighted the huge, sometimes disruptive impact of private companies like SpaceX.
So as you, our listener, reflect on all this, how deeply space is now tangled up with earthly geopolitics and economics, here's a final thought to mull over.
Yeah.
What unexpected challenges or maybe unforeseen opportunities might pop up as this new era of space competition and commercialization really takes off?
Interesting.
And maybe critically, given the lack of really strong international agreements right now, what role will international cooperation, or maybe more realistically, the lack of it, ultimately play in shaping humanity's future out there among the stars?